Got a job here that's going out the door here in a day or so. I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the components of it before it gets gone. It's an overview of a couple of the jigs and some of the gauges. I've got one more jig that is designed but it's not built yet, so we'll look at that in a little bit. The first jig is just a simple decorative end type of jig. Pretty self-explanatory. This is what I would call a fixed end jig. In other words, there's no adjustment on the ends here, and it'll take these patterns behind us here. We've got a 40-degree slope cut. We've got a 45. That 40 degrees measured down here is actually 50 up here. And a 45. We have a straight cutoff set of patterns. And then we've got, I believe this is a 10 degree for some beams. So we're going to put the 10 degree on here. Now that'll be for some beam cuts, and I'm going to put the 40 degree on the other end. Now that'll be for some knee brace work. And then we'll come over here to this jig, a knee brace and beam jig, and we install some of these templates on the side that'll actually give us pockets in our posts for some knee bracing. And then we'll get into some of the gauges that I have here. These jigs all have pins, dowel pins, as you can see here, and they'll come out enough to where we can pin our templates. Now this particular type of jig can take these templates. They're pretty easy to install. It makes it a little bit difficult when you've got a long pattern, and rather than having this a little flimsy out here, I've attached just a bar across here, a plate, to keep these together. But in order to put this on here, I've had to back these pins back inside the jig until this gets installed. So we'll just I'll make an attempt to get this in here. If you know about where these go, in this case these patterns are matched up where this breaks right with the edge of the jig. Well, it makes it a little bit easier to find out what we're doing here. And then that bottom will just swing over. If you can see that, it'll just swing over until that matches up at the bottom. And we have our first set of templates installed. And normally I would suggest having a jig like this and this screwed in and fixed to where it's not going to be moved around. If you need more of these jig template holders, that's what I'd suggest, and just leaving these permanently attached. And if they of course get damaged, we can replace these. The other type of installation, see, I'm going to put what I'm going to put on here. I'm going to put these rails on this side. Again, I've put all these screws in here. I'm going to keep that permanently attached. have a 10-degree cutoff and a 40-degree down here. That'll allow our chainsaw bar to cut the material that's sticking out here. In this case, we're going to be cutting some 8x8s. So this will give us a nice clean cut outside for 40-degree slope, and that for a 10-degree. Now the 10-degree is going to be used for end cut on some beams, and we'll attach the patterns to this other jig that will give us this cut in the post. Whereas this 40-degree will cut the end slope for a knee brace. It'll sit in a pocket with this in the shoulder and the side of our post. So that's what these will give us on the end of whatever size we want to put in here. It'll either be 6x6 or 8x8s or 6x8s. And then the clamps only need to be long enough for the material that's going to be sized in there. Now if the material is going to be real small, let's say 4 inches thick, what I'd prefer to see folks do is take these alignment screws and put them inside so it centers the material inside the jig. That'll give us a much better cut on here, especially when we tilt our bar and back sweep. Because of the roundness of the bar, we want that hollowed out effect on the end cut to be right in the middle rather than the material being offset and not get a perfectly symmetrical sweep cut made. So in setting up the alignment screws, there'll be a gauge that those screws will be set to. And all that gauge does is assure us that the screws are aligned properly so the material is going straight through there. Okay, enough for our little end trim gauge, or end trim jig on the decorative end. Let's go over here now to the post jig. Post jig is a little bit different in as much as this particular jig for this particular customer, this was designed to go on posts that will be standing. They already have just an array of posts that'll be set up. They'll shoot the elevations with the transit and cut everything off and start notching. And one of the nice things about these jigs is we can set these templates up on an end here to handle their end trimming. Perhaps not that that's exactly how they're going to go about it, but let's say now, once this is placed down over the top of the post, then they can do their end trimming up here. To give this jig purpose on the notching of the sides of the post, we're going to select some templates. We've got some templates back here both for 6-inch beams and 6-inch knee braces. Now we've also got some 8-inch beams and 8-inch knee braces. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the 8-inch on here first. That's for our beam. And I can feel where those pins are in these alignment holes. Again, I would suggest installing this to where it's going to be permanently attached. If you need more jig frames, that would be my suggestion so that these can quickly be used without having to change patterns, although you can change patterns. You can probably hear that thing indexing. So there we have it. This will be our knee brace side. Cutting this pocket here in the side of the beam. our 4-joist side for either a 6, or if I put the other patterns on, because of the depth of this cut, what we're trying to achieve is that when this post is being cut, I want this exit up here to blend in perfectly with the top of the 8-inch high beam. So this was designed to put a depth in that side of the beam, with the beam butted right up against the side of the jig here, so that that angle will blend perfectly with up here. We've got 10 degree. It gives us a pocket about 1 7/16 deep here. This angle can change, the pocket can be deeper, we can have taller beams, etc. But this particular job, they're working with 6 and 8-inch high. So there's our patterns. And again, in this case here with our knee brace pocket going to be put in the side of the beam, the vertical cut can be made, backed out, and the horizontal cut. I've added a little bit of a leader down here, keeping in mind that the part, the actual beam, will be back here, and because this will cut off of the pattern here 1/4 inch, I wanted someplace to set this, because if these folks are up or on ladders or however they're cutting this, I wanted them to have some kind of a leader here so that they get a nice crisp straight line in the side. Same thing with coming down, although up here we've got plenty of start area before the cut is starting to be made down through here. And it's just really, it looks and it is simple at this point. There's a lot of design in here, a lot of ease of replacement. Again, the alignment screws to center the workpiece. If we've got an 8-inch or a 6-inch, I like to see that in the middle, so that these sweep cuts, once this material is cut out and the sweep cut is made with the back sweep of the chainsaw, you can get a nice smooth finish and a little bit hollowed out there, so that the mating joint, the joinery, is real tight. That's just about it. Well, one thing I did design on this set of fixtures for this client, I made the bottom of this jig a fixed dimension from the finished cut, whether it be for a knee brace or a beam. We know exactly how far it's going to be from the bottom of the jig to the bottom of the cut. And these little indexing pegs, once it's measured down from the top of a finished post down to the height they want this pocket to be cut, they're going to add 8 inches, and on that line on the side of the post at 8 inches, this will be placed on the top of that 8-inch line, so that the jig, when it's slid down over the post, will hit the bottom of, or the top of this little peg, and it'll perfectly index the location of this notch, or these notches. Now, what that also enables them to do is to take the jig back off, rotate it, set it back down on the same stop without moving this, and cut in an adjacent side, and even all the way around the post, just aligning with that simple placed little peg, and all these notches then will be perfectly aligned around the perimeter of that post, whether it be on 2 sides, 1 side, 3 sides, or all 4 sides. So that would simplify having to lay out and measure everything. You're going to get perfect cuts in perfect placement. And that is essentially all there is to it. One of the things that we knew was going to happen on this particular job, we knew that there are going to be some instances where there's beams already atop the posts, so they're going to have to actually pull 2 of these plates off. And on the far side, I've got some screws that, when backed out, those screws can be put into the side of the beam, and you'll notice on all these plates there's a washer that's permanently installed in the plate here. So when that screw is screwed into the side of the post to hold the jig in place, because those back plates are not going to be there in a couple of the instances, then that washer will prevent an over-torquing and a destruction of this plate itself. And that should hold it there, and the clamping on the sides will just be for an alignment of the jig on the post. So the two screws will hold it against the side of the beam in lieu of having the clamping plates to the back side, and this is only after the beam has already been installed atop of a post. So we have a rare occurrence here, and once they've made their cuts on this particular job that this jig is going to, they'll permanently attach those back plates and do all their post cutting before any beams are put on. After the pocket has been put into the post and the jig has been removed, these templates that will be left on the job site can actually be put into that notch, that cut notch, and into the cut notch on another post, and then the measurement can be taken between these pieces. These little templates were intended to be used. It is 6 inches from the end of that notch to this placement of this tape measure right here, so that when I measure between two patterns, I add a foot to whatever this measurement is, and that'll give us the distance from point to point on the length of that beam. The same thing holds true with the knee brace notcher. Turn this jig around so I can stay on this side. And once this pocket has been cut into the post, in this case we're cutting an 8-inch, so we'll use the 8-inch template. This template can then sit or rest in that notch. It'll actually be in a notch, look about like that. Once that was put in, and once the other one has been put in the top of the knee brace notch, in this case, because these angles were so long, when you're measuring from this lip to the adjacent one, we're going to add 2 feet, not 1 foot, but 2 feet. You can see we have a 1 foot measurement from that tip to this edge. So we'll measure, add 2 feet, one for this end and one for the other end. These patterns can also be laid on the workpiece and traced out, so they'll know exactly where this angle needs to be cut with this jig. Now, can these be ganged together on a slider at this point? Yes, they can be. What I strongly suggest is that once a beam has been cut with this angled end trim jig, is that a chunk of that log be cut off and actually used rather than these patterns, because what that'll give you is a nice firm seat all the way across this beam. And then if your beam piece here, for instance, or your the beam piece over here, if I'd make that like 6 inches long, and this one here from that end maybe a foot long, so that you've got a nice firm seat in a big chunk of material rather than the patterns. This will work, but if the beam has been twisted when it was cut, this is going to mount as twisted, and a beam piece will tell you by looking it from one post to another whether or not that notch is also, if the beam through here is only going to fit tight maybe on one side of this notch. There's some tricks that can be done to correct some of that. You can literally even mount this jig with a twisted post. You could cock this aside with some shims and get a perfect notch so that the end of the beam is perfect, and it'll fit a perfectly cut notch even though the beam face is twisted inside the jig. Again, that's where a jig can benefit far and above layout lines, because the layout lines, it's really hard to do that and get all the angles correct. The The jig, if it ever has to come apart, I think I'd mentioned these pieces here coming off. There's little witness lines on all these parts, all four of these sides. If they're taken off, each one has a unique line to help put this piece back on this end perfectly on this place. This will not match over here, at least will not match the lines, even though they pretty much are interchangeable. If one of these got broken, yes, you could, in an emergency, you could slap it on the other side, but there's a distinct piece that fits in that distinct spot. That's pretty much it. All these parts are replaceable. The little T-nuts. Here's a package of material that will go to the job site. There's a couple of chains that are beaver tooth ground, a DVD on installing the chainsaw attachment on the bar, which has already been done, but if they want to do another bar, they've got drill bit, gauge, some little pins to back out the dowels that are in the jig, extra dowel pin jig pins, and here's these T-nuts that fit into the grooves in the side of the jig, and also some retainer rings and some extra screws. This is all off-the-shelf item here. I don't like to ship too many of these out because I like to keep track of how many folks are breaking, and I can offer some suggestions because there's not too many things that will allow that to break, over torquing being one, but inappropriate use of the jig. If this is hit inadvertently, it'll sometimes break this retainer ring, and that's just that's handling error. It's not operational errors. That's it. I wasn't sure how much of a video to do with this equipment. I wanted to have something on record before this got out the door, because this is not something I would have an extra copy of here at the shop. I'm hoping to video record some of the operation with this on the job site here in a couple of days. Be actually in the Chattanooga area. So I'm not sure how much I'll be able to record down there. Usually in a work environment things are pretty hectic. I get on a roll when I go through this because what I've gone through today, there's been no script out here. These are just things that are in my mind, having operated with this type of equipment for many years. Once you get on a job site, with the questions and the concerns that those operators will have, which is really important, it may disrupt any routine that I would come through with here on our pad outside the shop. So we'll try to capture some on the job site, and we'll probably even learn more on the job site than we can learn further here, because it's the conditions there that really dictate what this needs to do. And I try to make this equipment self-explanatory, to the point where an operator who has never seen this before can pick up things and start pretty from scratch and know kind of what to do with it. It's hard to replace experience and hands-on working, but until that happens, I think when they see this, knowing what they've been wanting to do, this was all described to me over a phone. This is the first time actually I've tried to build this particular type of a jig, but the operation is the same as all of them I've built for 30 years. So we'll take it from the job site in a couple of days.